the question you've got is, what's the formula? So how can I actually kind of crack the code on the writing or the elements to make sure that kind of I win? Because obviously it's a really important thing, to contribute to, but also, to be recognised for. So what we did was we looked at all of out of the pool, and there are hundreds and hundreds in the pool. We then looked at the finalists, bronze, silver and gold entries, and we tried to figure out, is there a formula? And the short, unfortunately for all of you who've bothered to come, the answer is no. There isn't a formula to win, but there is kind of a series of things that will help you as you're crafting your entries, either alone with clients or with other agency partners. So what we're attempting to do in 7 slides and 12 minutes is to codify the key success stories or the key things that kind of stood out for us. So what you see up there is obviously there were 93 entries, there were 93 finalists, and of those 53 were awarded, and I won't go through the details. So there are a couple of things that stuck out for us around goals, and probably the most important one, I think this is certainly a client education piece, fewer goals pay off in your entry. So what we found was winners averaged about 3.7 goals, whereas sort of all pool was about 5. So, be precise, and I know it's not new words, but be precise. Here is empirical evidence when you're dealing with your clients that show effective marketing campaigns as awarded by the best in the country tend to have fewer goals. So that was kind of a really important one. The other thing is that goal setting was in the more successful entries, largely evidence-based. And I've given kind of an example of some of those. I'll talk a little bit more research later. But what you see is, yes, those that did really well had a clear and definable insight. I know for the planners in the room, you're like, duh. You'd be surprised that some didn't, right? So, keep an eye, spend some time to develop that out. From a strategy point of view, start with a strong, actionable insight about your audience. This was common across finalists and winners, certainly, and what we found was those that did better typically would have that classic, we've got a category insight, we've got a client insight, we've got a consumer insight, 4 C's, C is the magic letter, I suppose, in this part of the world. But what ended up happening was those that did better actually started with customer at the core, which I know is kind of wanky language, but actually having that insight in the beginning. So yes, your client will give you 26 of theirs, these are all the important, really key insights that we have, kind of whittle it down. Channels. So the sweet spot is 4. And that graph up the top, while it doesn't look very interesting, is actually really important from an integration point of view. So what we found was the measure of effectiveness, if you had 1 channel, 2 channel, 3 channel, 4 channel, and so on through the list. Once you got to 4, you kind of peaked based on the entries that we received. And once you started to go 5 channel, 6 channel, 7 channel, 8 channel, what you're actually doing was reducing your efficacy from an effectiveness point of view as judged by the judges. The other thing that's really important is reach. You really need people to understand whether that's a little target and you reach 100% of 50 people if that's your audience, or 100% of 2 million people depending, but you've actually got to, from an effectiveness point of view, which is kind of common sense, isn't it? No one's going to take action if they don't actually know you or have ever heard of your message. So that was a key one. For the creative folks in the room, celebrities and humour pay off big time. They're the big winners. We were looking for trends. We saw sports we saw sports and we saw music and we saw a couple of other bits and pieces. But, woe be it from me to guide creative directors or writers. But what you will see is the entries that had the strongest impact were certainly those that featured humour, certainly, and then certainly celebrities, they kind of help as well. ROI, this was an interesting one. I've done an ROI calculation as an example, totally made up. If it bears an entry you supplied, that's just, the magic of luck. One of the things we found was this was probably the bit that was most challenging in terms of finding common ground. So we started with, well, was it supplied or wasn't it? And what we found was that in many instances, 63% of finalists provided an ROI figure. What we found was those that followed the formula tended to do better because I think there was clarity around, the flow of the numbers. Some, and I understand it's not always easy to provide a sales figure, particularly if you're a social or not-for-profit or, there are lots of other goals you can set. creating a third party or proxy data. So we used the industry standard, loss of customer number. Was certainly worked, but probably not as effectively as sticking to the formula. What was really interesting, though, was only 42% of those who supplied an ROI figure got the calculation correct. So given it's an effectiveness award, I would, and this is just, ignore this if you want, go and talk to your CFO or your accountant. As you're writing awards, just go, hey, does this make sense? Like, does this actually make sense and is it calculated correctly? Because I know how much work goes into collecting that data to then actually fill the formula out the wrong way. No, you want to kill yourself.